The wind outside the Blackwood saloon didn't just howl, it screamed, a high, thin sound like a dying animal trapped under the ice. But inside, the silence was worse. It was the kind of silence that suffocated, heavy with tobacco smoke and the sour reek of unwashed bodies and spilled whiskey. 20 men sat frozen in their chairs, their eyes locked on the corner table where a life was ending. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, terrifying slide of gold coins across scarred wood. Sarah sat perfectly still. Her spine was a rod of iron, holding up a body that wanted to collapse. She was 22, but tonight, in the dim, flickering light of the kerosene lamps, she looked ancient. Her hands rested on her lap, concealed beneath the frayed fabric of her gray wool dress. Her right hand was curled into a fist, so tight her knuckles were white, gripping a jagged shard of broken pottery she had salvaged from a smashed mug on the floor moments ago. It was sharp. It cut into her palm. The pain was the only thing telling her she was still alive. Across the table, her brother, Thomas, was weeping. It wasn't a dignified grief. It was a wet, sniveling sound. He looked at the cards in his hand, then at the man sitting opposite him, then finally, shamefully, at Sarah. His eyes were red-rimmed, frantic, the eyes of a dog that knows it has just bitten its master and fears the kick. I can fix this, Sarah, Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. I just need one more hand. One more. You don't have a hand, Thomas, the stranger said. The voice was low, rough like gravel grinding under a boot heel. It belonged to John Mercer. John Mercer was not a handsome man. He was a landscape of violence. His face was weathered, carved from granite and left out in the Montana wind too long. A scar ran from his left ear down to his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his thick, dark coat. He didn't look like the other patrons, miners, drunks, desperate gamblers. He looked like something that had walked out of the storm and intended to drag someone back into it. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural. While Thomas twitched and sweated, Mercer was a statue. Only his hand moved, pushing a heavy canvas bag into the center of the table. It landed with a dull, heavy thud that echoed in the room. $800, Mercer said. Gold. Double eagle coins. Thomas stared at the bag. He licked his lips. The greed in his eyes warred with the terror, and the greed was winning. For the debt, Thomas stammered. This covers the debt I owe Vance. And interest, for the girl, Mercer corrected. The words hung in the air, suspended in the smoke. Sarah felt the shard of pottery dig deeper. A drop of warm blood trickled down her wrist. Hidden by her sleeve. She looked at her brother. She waited for him to stand up. She waited for him to throw the cards in Mercer's face, to pull his pistol, to do anything a brother should do. Thomas reached out. His fingers trembled as they touched the canvas bag. He didn't look at Sarah. He couldn't. She's a good worker, Thomas mumbled, clutching the gold. She can cook. She reads, too. Pa taught her. Done, Mercer said. He stood up. The movement was fluid, despite the heavy limp that favored his right leg. He was tall, looming over the table, casting a shadow that swallowed Thomas whole. He didn't look at the weeping man again. He turned his gaze to Sarah. His eyes were dark. Devoid of light, devoid of lust, devoid of pity. They were the eyes of a man looking at a tool he had just purchased at a hardware store. Get up, he said. Sarah didn't move. She stared at Thomas, burning the image of his cowardice into her mind. She wanted to remember this. She wanted to remember the exact shade of pale sweat on his forehead when he sold her. Thomas, she said. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried across the table like a gunshot. Thomas flinched. He hugged the gold to his chest. I had to, Sarah. Vance, you know what Harlan Vance would do. He'd kill me. He'd kill us both. This is better. This man paid. He paid. Get up, Mercer repeated, louder this time. Not a shout, but a command that brooked no argument. Sarah stood. Her legs felt numb. She walked around the table, her skirt sweeping the dirty floor. She stopped beside Thomas. For a second, Thomas looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Perhaps he expected a hug, a forgiveness, a goodbye. Sarah leaned down. "I hope it buys you a coffin that fits," she whispered. She turned and walked toward the door. Mercer was already there, holding it open. The wind blasted in, carrying snow that stung like needles. Sarah stepped out into the dark, clutching her hidden shard, walking into the winter of 1885 with a stranger who had just bought her life. The cold was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the world, freezing the breath in Sarah's lungs before she could exhale. Mercer's wagon was waiting, a sturdy, utilitarian thing hitched to two massive black horses that stomped impatiently in the snow. Mercer didn't offer a hand to help her up. He simply climbed onto the driver's bench, wrapped the reins around his gloved hands, and waited for her to scramble onto the rough wooden seat beside him. She sat, pulling her thin coat tighter. It was useless against this Montana freeze. She was shivering violently within seconds. Mercer clicked his tongue, and the horses lurched forward. The wagon wheels crunched over the hard-packed snow, leaving the lights of Blackwood behind. They rode in silence for what felt like hours. The town faded into a glow, then a speck, then nothing. There was only the white road, the black pine trees standing like sentinels, and the vast, indifferent sky choked with clouds. Sarah's hand was still clenched around the pottery shard. Her plan was simple, born of the desperate logic of a trapped animal. Wait until he stopped. Wait until he tried to touch her. Then aim for the neck. She stole a glance at him. Mercer stared straight ahead, his profile sharp and unreadable against the snow. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He didn't seem to notice the cold. He didn't seem to notice her. Suddenly, the wagon slowed. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Now, she thought. He's stopping. This is it. Mercer pulled on the reins, bringing the horses to a halt in a small clearing surrounded by aspens. He set the brake and turned to look at her. Sarah tensed, her grip tightening on the shard until she felt skin tear. She shifted her weight, ready to lunge. Mercer's eyes dropped to her hand, the one hidden in the folds of her dress. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was flat. Sarah froze. "I'm fine. You have something in your hand." "No, give it to me." "No." Mercer didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He simply held out a gloved hand, palm up. "The porcelain. Give it to me. Before you sever a tendon and become useless to me." Sarah stared at him, her breath coming in white puffs. She slowly withdrew her hand. The blood was dark and stark against her pale skin. She opened her fingers. The jagged triangle of white ceramic sat there, slick and red. Mercer took it. He didn't look at it. He tossed it over the side of the wagon into a snowbank. "It will break on a coat like this," he said, tapping his heavy shearling jacket. "And then you'll just have a furious man and no weapon." He reached into his boot. Sarah flinched, shrinking back against the cold wood of the seat. Mercer pulled out a knife. It was a hunting knife, the blade 6 inches of dark, folded steel, the handle made of worn stag bone. It was a weapon of war. Heavy and lethal. He flipped it in his hand, holding it by the blade, and extended the handle toward her. Sarah stared at the knife, then at his face. She couldn't process what was happening. Her mind, wired for fear, short-circuited. "Take it," he said. "Why?" Her voice was barely audible over the wind. "Because the world is full of wolves," Mercer said. "And sheep don't last the winter." "You bought me," she said, the absurdity of the situation making her bold. "You own me. Why give me a way to kill you?" Mercer's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was a grimace of something old and painful. "If you want to kill me, Sarah Vance, use steel. Porcelain breaks. Steel does the job." He waited. Slowly, Sarah reached out. Her shaking fingers closed around the bone handle. It was warm from his body heat. It felt heavy. It felt real. "Put it away," he commanded. "And wrap that hand." he tossed a clean rag from his pocket onto her lap. Then he snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward again into the darkness. Sarah wrapped her bleeding hand, the knife resting heavy in her pocket. She looked at the man beside her. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't threatened her. He had armed her. Fear was still there, cold and sharp. But now, it was mixed with something else. Confusion. And a terrifying curiosity. Who was this man who paid a fortune for a woman and then handed her the means to slit his throat? They arrived at the cabin hours later, when the moon was a pale smear behind the clouds. Mercer's land was isolated, tucked high in a valley where the wind funneled down from the peaks. The cabin was a squat, solid structure made of dark logs, built low to the ground to withstand the avalanches. A barn stood nearby, its silhouette hulking in the dark. Mercer halted the wagon. "Get down. Go inside. Start the fire." He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. He jumped down and began unhitching the horses, his limp more pronounced now after the long sit in the cold. Sarah climbed down, her legs stiff. She clutched the knife in her pocket as she approached the heavy oak door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was freezing, stagnant. It smelled of pine resin and old ash. She fumbled in the dark, finding a matchbox on a mantel she couldn't see but sensed was there. She struck a match. The flare of light revealed a room that was less a home and more a barracks. There was a stone fireplace, massive and blackened. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. A single cot in the corner, neatly made with military precision. No rugs. No curtains. No pictures on the walls. It was a space designed for survival, not living, and it was silent. The kind of silence that felt like it was watching you. Sarah moved mechanically. She found kindling and logs. She built the fire, her hands shaking as the flames caught. The warmth began to bleed into the room, pushing back the shadows. She heard the heavy stomp of boots on the porch. Mercer entered, carrying saddlebags and a rifle. He kicked the snow off his boots and closed the door, bolting it with a heavy iron bar. He looked at the fire, then at her. He nodded once, approvingly. "There is stew in the pantry." "Heat it," he said. He took off his coat and hung it on a peg. Underneath, he wore a simple flannel shirt and suspenders. He moved to the far side of the room, to a narrow door that Sarah hadn't noticed in the shadows. He took a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and opened it. Beyond lay a set of stairs leading up to an attic or loft. "Listen to me," Mercer said. He didn't turn around. His hand rested on the doorframe. "You sleep down here. On the cot. I sleep in the barn loft or on the floor. I don't care." He turned his head slightly, his profile lit by the fire. "But this door? The attic? You never open it. You never go up there. It stays locked. Do you understand?" "Yes," Sarah said. "Good." He locked the door again and put the key in his pocket. They ate in silence. The stew was thick, made of venison and root vegetables, surprisingly well seasoned. Sarah ate ravenously, realizing she hadn't eaten in 2 days. Mercer ate slowly, methodically, his eyes unfocused, staring into the flames. He didn't ask her about herself. He didn't make small talk. He treated her presence as a fact, an object that had been added to the room, like a new chair. When they finished, Mercer took his plate and hers to a basin. He pumped water from an indoor hand pump, a luxury out here, and washed them. "Go to sleep," he said. He took a bedroll from a corner, unrolled it on the hard wooden floor in front of the fire, and lay down, turning his back to her. Sarah sat on the edge of the cot. She still had her shoes on. She still had the knife in her pocket. "Aren't you?" She started, then stopped. "Aren't I what?" Mercer mumbled, already half asleep. "Aren't you going to?" She couldn't say it. "Claim what you bought." Mercer let out a long breath. "I bought a cook, Sarah Vance. And someone to keep the ghosts away. I didn't buy a whore." "Go to sleep." Sarah lay down on the cot, pulling the scratchy wool blanket up to her chin. The fire popped. Outside, the wind screamed again. She watched the unmoving lump of the man on the floor. He was a paradox. A monster who paid gold for a human being. A savior who gave her a weapon. A jailer who locked doors but left the front door unbarred until he came in. She clutched the knife handle through the fabric of her dress. She didn't sleep. She listened to his breathing. It was ragged, uneven. Sometime in the deep part of the night, she heard him whimpering. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of terror. The big, scarred man was thrashing in his bedroll, his hands clawing at the air, muttering words she couldn't catch. No, not the girl, not the girl. He gasped in his sleep. Sarah watched him, her eyes wide in the darkness. The butcher of the mountains, the man who terrified her brother, was afraid of the dark. 2 weeks passed, the snow deepened, burying the cabin up to the windowsills. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin and the path Mercer dug to the barn. Sarah fell into a routine. It was a survival mechanism. If she kept moving, she didn't have to think about Thomas. She didn't have to think about the life she had lost. She cooked. She scrubbed the floor until the wood grain shone. She mended Mercer's torn shirts. Mercer spent his days outside. He chopped wood with a violence that frightened her. He would stand in the yard, stripped to his undershirt despite the freezing temperatures, swinging the heavy axe. Thwack. 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 Each blow was precise, devastating. He wasn't just splitting wood, he was killing something invisible. He barely spoke to her. When he did, it was practical. More wood. Snow's coming. Check the grain. But he watched her. Sometimes, Sarah would look up from her sewing to find him staring at her. Not with desire. With a look of profound, agonizing confusion. As if he was trying to solve a puzzle that hurt his head. When their eyes met, he would look away instantly, shame coloring his features. He never touched her. Not once. If they passed each other in the narrow kitchen, he would press himself against the wall to avoid brushing her arm. It was as if he thought she was made of glass, or perhaps, that he was made of fire and would burn her. One afternoon, Sarah was in the barn, feeding the horses. Mercer had 2 huge black draft horses and a nimble gray mare. She liked the barn. It smelled of hay and horse warmth, a living smell that countered the sterile cold of the cabin. She was brushing the gray mare, humming a tune her father used to play on the fiddle. She didn't hear Mercer enter. That song, his voice came from the shadows. Sarah jumped, dropping the brush. Mercer was standing by the door, pitchfork in hand. His face was pale, paler than usual. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you, Sarah said, backing away. What is it? He asked. His voice was strained. It's just a folk song. The Valley of Red Rivers. My father used to play it. Mercer flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of the jaw, a twitch of the eye. But Sarah, who had learned to read micro-expressions to survive her brother's drunken rages, saw it. Your father, Mercer repeated. Robert Vance, yes. Sarah looked at him curiously. Did you know him? Before everything happened, Mercer gripped the pitchfork until his knuckles turned white. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, searching her face for something. I knew of him, Mercer said, his voice hollow. Everyone knew Robert Vance. The man who tried to bring water to the valley. The man who died in the fire. It wasn't an accident, Sarah said bitterly. Everyone says it was a barn fire. But I know it wasn't. Someone said it. Someone locked the doors. Mercer turned away abruptly. Facing the wall. His shoulders heaved. It's getting late, he said, his voice muffled. Go inside. Storm's coming. Sarah hesitated. She wanted to press him. There was a vibration in the air, a tension that hummed between them. But the fear was still there. She picked up her skirts and ran back to the house. That night, the storm didn't just come, it assaulted them. The wind hit the cabin like a physical blow. The timbers groaned. Snow piled up against the door. Inside, the fire roared. Mercer sat in his chair, cleaning his rifle. He did this every night. Dismantle, clean, oil, reassemble. Click. Clack. Slide. The rhythm of a killer. Sarah sat opposite him, darning a sock. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. She hadn't planned to ask. The words just fell out. Mercer didn't look up. "I told you. I needed a cook." "No," Sarah said. She put down the sock. She was tired of the silence. Tired of the mystery. "You paid $800. You could have hired a cook for $10 a month. You could have bought a mail-order bride for $50. You paid a fortune." "Why?" Mercer stopped polishing the barrel. He looked at the fire. "Maybe I have too much money and no sense. You live like a monk. You don't spend money on anything. Why me?" "Why Thomas?" Mercer looked at her then. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, making them look like pools of oil, "because Thomas was going to lose you anyway." Mercer said softly. "If not to me, then to Vance. Or to a pimp in Deadwood. Or to the winter, so you're a savior." Sarah challenged. "St. John of the Mountain?" Mercer laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "No. I'm no saint, Sarah. I'm just the man who got there first. To do what? To keep you alive. For what purpose?" Mercer stood up. He walked to the window, peering out into the swirling white nothingness. "Because some debts can't be paid with gold. Sometimes, you just have to keep something safe. To balance the ledger." "What ledger?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, a dark silhouette against the white storm, a man guarding a prisoner he refused to touch. The storm broke 3 days later. The sun came out, blindingly bright, reflecting off 4 feet of fresh snow. The valley looked like a diamond, beautiful and deadly. Mercer was outside clearing the roof. Sarah was churning butter in the kitchen. Then, the dog barked. Mercer didn't have a dog. Sarah froze. She went to the window. A sled was approaching. It was a fancy thing, painted black with gold trim, pulled by 4 pristine white horses. A driver in a fur coat sat at the front. Behind him sat a man wrapped in buffalo robes, Harlan Vance. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She knew that face. Everyone in the territory knew the face of the man who owned the banks, the land, and the law. He was handsome in a reptilian way, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mercer slid down from the roof. He landed in a snowbank, rifle in hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. He walked to the gate, blocking the path of the sled. Sarah cracked the window open. She had to hear, "Morning, John." Vance called out. His voice was smooth, cultured, cutting through the crisp air. "Bit deep for a visit, I know, but I was in the neighborhood. Checking on my investments." "You have no investments here, Harlan," Mercer said. He didn't lower the rifle. Vance chuckled. He stepped out of the sled. He wore a fine suit under his furs, completely impractical for the weather. It was a flex of power. He didn't need to dress for the cold. The world adjusted to him. "Oh, come now. I heard you made a purchase in Blackwood. Quite the extravagant spend for a man who lives like a hermit." Vance's eyes drifted to the cabin window. He saw Sarah. He smiled and tipped his hat. Sarah pulled back, heart hammering. "Go home, Harlan," Mercer said. "I just wanted to see her," Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. "Robert Vance's girl. The one that got away, she's mine," Mercer said. "I paid the gold. The contract is signed. She belongs to me, does she?" Vance walked closer to the gate. He stopped 3 feet from the barrel of Mercer's rifle. "Does she know, John? Does she know who she's sleeping with?" Mercer tensed. Does she know that you're not just a lonely rancher?" Vance raised his voice, pitching it toward the cabin. Does she know why they used to call you the Butcher of Butte? Does she know how you earned that gold? Sarah pressed her ear to the crack. The butcher, she knows enough, Mercer growled. I doubt that, Vance smirked. I doubt she knows that her savior is the man who does the devil's wet work. Tell me, John, when you look at her, do you see the father? Do you see Robert screaming in the barn? Mercer cocked the rifle. The sound was loud in the silence. Get off my land. Vance held up his gloved hands in mock surrender. All right. Touchy. I suppose guilt does that to a man. He turned back to the sled. Enjoy her, John. While you can. You think you can buy redemption? You think saving the kitten washes the blood off your hands? You're a killer. You'll always be a killer. And eventually, you'll kill her too. It's what you do. Vance climbed back into the sled. Oh, and tell Thomas the First said hello. Poor boy. He really misses his sister, Vance signaled the driver. The sled turned around in a wide arc and headed back down the valley. Mercer stood there for a long time. He didn't move until the sled was a speck in the distance. Then, he lowered the rifle. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a building whose foundation had just cracked. Inside the cabin, Sarah slid down the wall to the floor, the butcher. Robert screaming in the barn, the pieces slammed together in her mind, forming a picture so horrific she wanted to vomit, the nightmares. The refusal to touch her. The reaction to the song. The ledger, he hadn't saved her because he was kind. He hadn't bought her because he wanted a wife, he had bought her because he broke her, he was the one. Not just a bystander. Not just a witness. John Mercer was the man who had locked the barn doors 10 years ago. He was the reason her father died screaming. He was the reason her family fell into ruin. He was the reason Thomas turned to gambling, he was the architect of her hell, and now, she was locked in a cabin with him, armed with nothing but a knife he gave her and a snowstorm that wouldn't end. The door opened. Mercer walked in. He brought the cold with him. He looked exhausted, aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He hung up his coat. He leaned the rifle against the wall. He turned to look at Sarah. She was standing now, by the kitchen table, her hand was in her pocket. Her fingers were wrapped around the bone handle of the knife. Mercer looked at her eyes. He saw the change. He saw the knowledge. He didn't ask if she heard. He knew. Sarah, he started. Don't, she whispered. Don't speak. Mercer closed his mouth. He stood there, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. Is it true? She asked. Her voice didn't shake. It was dead calm. Mercer looked at the floor. Then he looked at her. He didn't flinch. He didn't lie. Yes, one word. It destroyed the fragile peace of the last 2 weeks. It turned the cabin from a shelter into a cage. Sarah gripped the knife. She calculated the distance. 5 steps. He was tired. He was limping. She could do it. She could end it now, but she didn't move, because Vance had said something else. Tell Thomas the First said hello. Thomas wasn't gone. Thomas was with Vance, and if she killed Mercer now, she would be alone in the winter with Vance coming back. She released the knife. She took a breath. Dinner is in an hour, she said coldly. She turned her back on him and began to chop carrots. The sound of the knife hitting the cutting board echoed in the room. Chop. 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 Mercer stood there for a moment longer. Then, silently, he turned and walked out the door. Into the cold, to sleep in the barn with the ghosts he could no longer hide. The enemy was no longer at the gate. The enemy was in the bed. And the winter had only just begun. The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a glass jar, and inside, 2 insects were circling each other, waiting to see who would sting first. For 3 days after Vance's visit, John Mercer did not step foot inside the main room except to eat. He slept in the barn with the horses. He worked himself into a stupor, chopping wood until the pile blocked out the view of the valley. mending fences that the snow had already buried. Sarah watched him from the window. Now she knew what she was looking at. The limp wasn't just an injury. It was a legacy of violence. The silence wasn't shyness, it was the heavy lid on a coffin of guilt. The butcher. She tested the name on her tongue when she was alone. It tasted like ash. She should have hated him. She did hate him. Every time she looked at the fireplace, she remembered the story of the barn fire that killed her father. She imagined Mercer there, striking the match, locking the door. But hate is a hot emotion, and the winter was so cold, survival demanded cooperation. She cooked because if she didn't, they would starve. He chopped wood because if he didn't, they would freeze. They moved around each other like ghosts, performing the choreography of life while dead inside. On the fourth evening, the temperature dropped to 30 below zero. Mercer came in for dinner. His beard was frosted with ice. His hands were red and raw. He ate standing up by the door, ready to retreat to the barn. "You'll die out there tonight," Sarah said. It was the first time she had spoken to him in days. Mercer paused, the spoon halfway to his mouth. "The horses need heat, the horses have thick coats. You don't." Sarah didn't look at him. She was scrubbing a pot with fierce intensity. "If you freeze to death, I can't chop the wood. And then I die. I don't want to die because of your stupidity." It was a cold, pragmatic invitation. Mercer hesitated. He looked at the fire. Longing in his eyes. Then he nodded. "I'll sleep by the door," he said. He laid his bedroll as far from her cot as possible. He checked the bolt on the door. He checked the window shutters. Then he laid his revolver next to his pillow. Sarah lay in the dark, listening to him breathe. The rhythm was different tonight. It wasn't the ragged breathing of nightmares. It was shallow, guarded. Did he suffer? Sarah asked into the darkness. The silence stretched so tight she thought it would snap. "Sarah, did my father suffer? Or was it the smoke?" Mercer shifted. The leather of his gun belt creaked. "It was the smoke," Mercer whispered. His voice was a vibration in the floorboards. He was gone before the flames reached him. "You were there." "Yes." "Did you lock the door?" A long pause. "The wind rattled the shutters." "Yes." Sarah closed her eyes. Tears leaked out, hot and fast, soaking her pillow. She gripped the knife handle under her blanket. "Why didn't you kill me then?" she whispered. "I was 12. I was in the house." "You could have finished it." "I couldn't," Mercer said. His voice broke, a sound like a branch snapping under snow. "I looked in the window. You were brushing your hair. You looked clean. Everything else was so dirty. I couldn't touch you, so you bought me 10 years later instead." "I bought you time," Mercer said. "That's all I have to give." Sarah didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The confession hung in the freezing air, a ugly, naked thing. She fell asleep hating him, and yet, comforted by the fact that the monster was guarding the door. The attack happened 2 nights later. It wasn't Vance. It was nature. A pack of timber wolves, starved by the unrelenting winter, smelled the horses. They came in the dead of hour, shadows flowing over the snow, silent and deadly. The screaming of the horses woke them. Mercer was up before Sarah opened her eyes. He grabbed his rifle and burst out the door without putting on his coat. Sarah scrambled up, grabbing the lantern. She heard the crack 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 of the Winchester rifle, the snarling of wolves, the terrified squeals of the black geldings. She ran to the door. The yard was a chaotic tableau lit by moonlight. Dark shapes swarmed the barn entrance. Mercer was a demon in the snow, swinging the rifle stock like a club, firing point blank. One wolf, massive and gray, lunged at his throat. Mercer threw up his arm. The jaws clamped down. Sarah screamed. Mercer didn't scream. He roared. He dropped the rifle and pulled the knife from his boot, the twin of the one he had given her. He drove it into the wolf's neck. Once. Twice. 3 times, the wolf let go. Falling back, dying in the snow, The other wolves, sensing the shift in power, turned and fled into the darkness. Mercer stood swaying in the snow. His left arm hung uselessly. Blood, black in the moonlight, poured from his shoulder and forearm, steaming in the cold air. He turned toward the house. He took one step, then two. Then he collapsed face first into the drift. Sarah didn't think. She ran out into the freezing night in her nightgown. She grabbed him by the back of his suspenders. He was heavy, dead weight. "Get up," she screamed. "John." "Get up," he groaned, pushing himself up with his good arm. Together, slipping and stumbling, they dragged his broken body back into the cabin. Sarah kicked the door shut and bolted it. She dragged him to the fireside. The light of the hearth revealed the damage. The wolf had torn through his flannel shirt and the flesh beneath. His forearm was a mess of hamburger meat. His shoulder had deep puncture wounds. He was bleeding out. "Needle," Mercer gasped, his face gray. "Whiskey." "Fire." Sarah's hands shook, but her mind went cold and sharp. She gathered the supplies. She tore a strip from her petticoat. She knelt beside him. She cut away the ruined shirt. For the first time, she saw his chest. It was a map of pain. Scars crisscrossed his torso, bullet wounds, knife slashes, burns. He was a man who had been broken and put back together a dozen times. "Drink," she ordered, holding the whiskey bottle to his lips. He drank deeply, coughing. "Pour it on the arm," he said through gritted teeth. Sarah poured the alcohol. Mercer arched his back, a guttural sound escaping his throat, his heels drumming on the floor. "Now," he panted. "Sew it." Sarah threaded the needle. She held it over the flame until the tip glowed orange. She looked at the wound. Then she looked at his neck. The jugular vein was right there, pulsing under the skin. She held the needle. One thrust in the wrong place. Or just, do nothing. Let him bleed. Let the cold take him. It would be justice. An eye for an eye. A life for a father. Mercer opened his eyes. He looked at her. He saw the hesitation. He saw the calculation. He didn't beg. He didn't ask for mercy. He simply looked at her with that same resignation he had shown Vance. "Do it," his eyes said. "I deserve it." Sarah's hand trembled. She thought of Thomas, selling her for a debt. She thought of Vance, smiling in his sled. She thought of the wolves waiting in the dark. She wasn't Thomas. She wasn't Vance. She wasn't a killer. "Hold still," she whispered. She drove the needle into his skin. The next hour was an eternity of intimacy and horror. Sarah stitched the torn flesh back together. She wiped the blood that welled up. She felt the heat of his skin, the tension in his muscles as he fought not to scream. There were no words. Only the snick of the needle, the hiss of the fire, and his ragged breathing. She was hurting him to save him. The irony wasn't lost on her. When the last knot was tied, Mercer slumped back, unconscious or sleeping. She couldn't tell. Sarah sat back on her heels. Her hands were covered in his blood. Her nightgown was stained with it. She went to the basin and washed her hands. The water turned pink. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. "You saved him," she whispered to herself. "Why?" She touched the glass. "Because he's the only thing standing between me and the wolves." But she knew it was more than that. When she had touched his scars, when she had held his life in her hands, she hadn't felt the desire for revenge. She had felt the weight of his humanity. He was a monster, yes. But he was a monster who was trying to bleed for her. She covered him with a blanket. She sat in the chair, the rifle across her lap, watching him breathe. She didn't sleep that night. She kept watch over the killer. 50 miles away, in the velvet-draped parlor of the Blackwood Hotel, Thomas Vance was learning the true meaning of hell. He wasn't in a cell. He was in a chair, a comfortable velvet chair, with a glass of fine brandy in his hand. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace. Harlan Vance stood by the window, smoking a cigar. "You look terrible, Thomas," Vance said, not turning around. Thomas took a gulp of brandy. His hands were shaking. He had been rescued by Vance's men 3 days ago. Or captured. He wasn't sure which. I tried to stop him, Thomas lied. Mercer. He pulled a gun. He took Sarah by force. Vance turned. He smiled. It was a terrifying expression. We both know that's not true, Thomas. We both know you sold her. You traded your own flesh and blood for a bag of coins. Thomas flinched. I had no choice. There is always a choice. Vance walked over and poured himself a drink. And you made the wrong one. You gave a valuable asset to a dangerous man, Sarah. Valuable? Thomas laughed nervously. She's just a girl. She reads too much. Vance's face hardened. He leaned in close, the smell of expensive tobacco and menace overwhelming Thomas. She is Robert's daughter. And Robert had a secret, Thomas. A secret he didn't tell you, because you're a fool. But he might have told her. Or left it in a book. Or a map. What secret? The location of the Argent Vein. Thomas's eyes widened. The Argent Vein was a legend. The lost silver lode that every miner in Montana dreamed of. Their father had discovered it. Mercer knows. Vance lied smoothly. That's why he bought her. He doesn't want a wife. He wants the map. He's probably torturing it out of her right now. Breaking her fingers one by one. Thomas paled. No. John isn't. He's quiet. He's not. John Mercer is the man I sent to burn your barn down, Vance said. Thomas dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor. Brandy soaked into the rug like blood. What? I ordered it, Vance said, shrugging. But John lit the match. He stood there and listened to your father scream. And now, he has your sister. Vance placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. It felt like a claw. You can save her, Thomas. You can be the brother you failed to be. How? Thomas whispered. Tears streaming down his face. Mercer is holed up in the valley. It's a fortress. I can't storm it without risking Sarah getting caught in the crossfire. I need someone to get her out. Someone she trusts. She hates me. She loves you. She's your sister. Blood calls to blood. If you go there, if you tell her you came to rescue her, she'll listen. Vance pressed a revolver into Thomas's hand. It was cold and heavy. Go to the valley. Wait for the signal. Get her out of the house. And if Mercer tries to stop you. Vance pointed at the gun. You kill the monster. You become the hero, Thomas. And I will forgive all your debts. You'll be rich. You'll be the man your father wanted you to be. Thomas looked at the gun. He imagined Sarah suffering. He imagined Mercer, the arsonist, the killer, touching her. A strange, desperate light entered his eyes. He stood up. I'll do it, Thomas said. I'll kill him. Vance smiled. Good boy. As Thomas marched out of the room, fueled by brandy and lies, Vance's smile vanished. He turned to his foreman, a brute named Silas. Follow him, Vance said. Keep a distance. When he gets the girl out, kill them both. But keep the girl alive long enough to tell us where the map is. And the boy? Silas asked. The boy is a loose end. Burn him. Mercer's fever broke on the 3rd day after the wolf attack. He was weak, his skin the color of old parchment, but he was alive. He spent most of the time sleeping on the bedroll by the fire. Sarah changed his bandages. She fed him broth. She moved around him with a new authority. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the jailer, he was the invalid. She was the keeper of the keys. On the 4th afternoon, while Mercer slept deeply, drugged by laudanum and exhaustion, Sarah saw the key. It had fallen out of his trousers pocket when she moved his clothes to wash them. A small, iron key, the key to the attic. Sarah picked it up. It felt cold in her palm. You never open it. You never go up there. She looked at Mercer. He was deep asleep, his chest rising and falling slowly. Sarah moved to the narrow door in the corner. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was a violation. This was dangerous. She didn't care. She needed to know who she was living with. She unlocked the door. It opened silently. She climbed the stairs. The air up here was freezing, unheated. Dust motes danced in the light coming from a small round window. The attic wasn't a torture chamber. It wasn't a dungeon, it was an office. A desk sat in the center, neat and organized. Maps covered the walls, geological surveys, mining claims, topographical charts drawn with exquisite detail. Sarah walked to the desk. On it sat a single, thick leather-bound book. She opened it. It was a ledger. But not a ledger of debts or kills, it was a ledger of penance. September 1875, Widow Miller. Husband killed in the copper strike. Sent $50. Anonymously. January 1878, the O'Connor boy. Leg lost in the blast. Sent $100 for doctors. Anonymously. March 1880, the Vance family. Barn fire. Survivors, Thomas and Sarah. Sarah's finger traced the entry. The ink was smeared, as if water, or a tear, had fallen on it before it dried. Underneath, written in a shaky hand, attempted to send funds via bank draft. Returned. Vance blocked it. Must find another way. She turned the pages. Every month for 10 years. Every month, John Mercer, the butcher, had taken his blood money and sent it to the families of the people he had hurt. He had kept nothing for himself. That was why he lived in a shack. That was why he had no fine clothes. He was bankrupting himself to pay for his sins. And on the last page, the most recent entry, November 1885, Sarah Vance. Sold by brother. Purchased for $800. Purpose, protection. Debt status, unpayable. Sarah stared at the words. Debt status, unpayable. He didn't think he had bought her. He thought he was paying a debt that could never be settled. She looked up at the maps on the wall. She recognized the handwriting on the notes. It was precise, angular. It looked like her father's handwriting. She stepped closer to a large map of the valley. It was marked with red ink. Lines converging on a single point deep in the ravine behind the cabin. Wait, she recognized this map. It was a copy. She had seen the original on her father's desk the night he died, the Argent vein. Mercer knew where it was. He had the map. But he hadn't mined it. He hadn't sold it. He was sitting on top of the biggest silver deposit in Montana, living in poverty. Why? Because it was her father's discovery. And Mercer was guarding it. He's not stealing it, Sarah whispered. He's hiding it, Sarah. The voice came from the bottom of the stairs. Sarah slammed the book shut. She spun around. Mercer was standing at the foot of the stairs, leaning heavily against the doorframe. He was pale, sweating, his bandaged arm clutched to his chest. But his eyes were awake. And they were filled with a terrible sadness. I told you not to go up there, he rasped. Sarah walked down the stairs, clutching the key. She stopped 3 steps above him, so they were eye level. You knew, she said. You knew about the silver. You knew about the money you tried to send. It doesn't change anything, Mercer said. It doesn't bring him back, no, Sarah said. It doesn't. She stepped down, forcing him to move back or touch her. He moved back, stumbling slightly. But it means you're not the monster Vance says you are, she said. You're just a ghost. Haunting your own life. Vance is coming back, Mercer said, changing the subject. He won't stop with a visit. He wants the map. I know, you have to leave. As soon as the snow clears. You take the money in the safe, there's a little left, and you go to California. And you? Mercer looked at the attic door. I stay. I finished the ledger. Sarah understood then. He intended to die here. He intended to let Vance come, take the map over his dead body, and end the cycle. No, Sarah said. Mercer looked at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. you don't get to die to make yourself feel better, John Mercer. That's the easy way out. That's cowardice. She walked past him into the kitchen. She picked up the knife from the table, the one she had used to cut carrots, the one he had given her to kill him. She slammed it into the wood of the table. It stood quivering. We fight, she said. We hold this ground. You owe me a life, John. Not my father's. Mine. And if you die, Vance takes me. So you don't get permission to die. Mercer stared at her. The pathetic, broken girl he had bought was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the winter fire. Slowly, painfully, a spark returned to his dead eyes. A flicker of something that looked like respect. Maybe even hope. Okay, he whispered. We fight. 2 days later, the sky turned a bruised purple, signaling another storm. Mercer was well enough to hold a rifle, though his left arm was in a sling. They spent the morning fortifying the cabin. They boarded up the lower windows. They created firing slits. Sarah was loading cartridges into a belt when she saw movement at the tree line. She grabbed the binoculars Mercer kept on the sill. A single figure was stumbling through the snow. He wasn't wearing a heavy coat. He was falling, getting up, falling again. Sarah gasped. It's Thomas. Mercer limped to the window. He took the binoculars. It's a trick. He's freezing, John. Look at him. He's alone. Vance is using him. He's my brother. Sarah shouted. She grabbed her coat. Sarah, wait. Mercer tried to grab her with his good hand, but she was too fast. She unbolted the door and ran out into the snow. Thomas, she screamed. The figure in the snow lifted his head. His face was blue with cold, his lips cracked. Sarah. He croaked. Help me, escaped. Sarah ran to him. The snow was waist deep. She reached him and fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. He was ice cold. I've got you, she sobbed. I've got you, I came, to save you, Thomas whispered, his teeth chattering. Vance, he's coming. But I got away. Mercer appeared on the porch, rifle in one hand. He scanned the tree line. Nothing. No horses. No men. Just the vast, silent white. He looked at Thomas. The boy looked half dead. Maybe he had escaped. Maybe blood really was thicker than water. Get him inside, Mercer called out. Sarah dragged Thomas toward the cabin. Mercer helped pull him over the threshold. They laid him by the fire. Sarah stripped off his wet clothes and wrapped him in blankets. She poured whiskey down his throat. Thomas coughed, color slowly returning to his cheeks. He looked around the cabin, his eyes darting to the boarded windows, the weapons, the attic door. You're barricaded, Thomas said. Vance was here, Sarah said, rubbing his hands. He threatened us. He's bad, Sarah, Thomas said, gripping her hand. He told me John killed Pa. Sarah stiffened. She looked at Mercer, who was standing by the window, keeping watch. I know, Sarah said quietly. Thomas's eyes widened. You know. And you're still here. With him, it's complicated, Thomas, he's a murderer. Thomas's voice rose, shrill and panicked. He's holding you prisoner. No, he's not. Sarah, listen to me. Thomas pulled her closer. I have a plan. I have horses hidden in the ravine. We can go. Now. While he's distracted, we can't leave in this weather, Thomas. And John. John is protecting us, protecting you. Thomas laughed, a manic edge to it. He's the danger. Sarah, please. Do you trust me? I'm your brother. I'm the only family you have left. Sarah looked at his desperate face. She remembered him at the poker table. But she also remembered him teaching her to read when Pa was too drunk. She remembered him hiding her when Pa was angry. He was weak. But he was her blood. I trust you, she whispered. Thomas smiled. Good. Then get your coat. We're leaving, now, right now, Thomas stood up. He seemed to have recovered remarkably fast. He reached into his discarded coat pile and pulled out something. It was the revolver Vance gave him. He leveled it at Mercer's back. "John." Sarah screamed. Mercer spun around. He saw the gun. He saw Thomas's shaking hand. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't fire. He just looked at the boy with sad, tired eyes. "Don't do it, son," Mercer said softly. "Shut up." Thomas screamed. "You killed my father. You stole my sister." "Thomas, put the gun down." Sarah stepped between them, shielding Mercer. "Move, Sarah. I'm saving you, you're not saving me." Sarah shouted. "You're selling me again. Did Vance send you?" "Did he?" Thomas flinched. He promised to clear the debts. He promised we could go away. Be rich." "Oh, Thomas," Sarah wept. "You fool, move." Thomas cocked the hammer. "I have to do this. I have to be the hero." "No," Mercer said. He stepped aside, pushing Sarah gently out of the line of fire. He dropped his rifle. He held his hands out, open, empty. "You want to kill me, Thomas?" Mercer walked toward the gun. "Do it. I owe you that." "Pull the trigger, John." "No." Sarah cried. "Do it." Mercer roared. "Be a man for once in your life. Take the shot." Thomas's hand shook violently. He stared at Mercer's chest, at the target offered to him. He wanted to. He wanted to be the hero, but he was Thomas Vance. He wasn't a killer. He was a coward. I can't," Thomas sobbed. He lowered the gun. Crack, the sound of a gunshot shattered the room, but Thomas hadn't fired. The wood of the front door splintered inward. Thomas jerked violently, a bloom of red appearing on his chest. He looked down at it, confused. He looked at Sarah. Did I do good?" He collapsed. Outside, a voice boomed over the wind. "Good work, Thomas. You flushed them out." It was Harlan Vance. Mercer tackled Sarah, throwing her to the floor as a hail of bullets shredded the windows. Glass shattered. Wood flew. The cabin was being turned into a sieve. Thomas lay by the fire, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, the gun slipping from his fingers. The Judas goat had led the wolves to the slaughter, and the wolves had eaten him first. Mercer dragged Sarah behind the overturned heavy oak table. He pressed his revolver into her hand. "He's dead," Sarah whispered, staring at her brother's body. "Yes," Mercer said. He checked the cylinder of his own gun. His face was a mask of cold fury. "The butcher was back, but we're not," he said. "Not yet." He looked at Sarah. "Are you ready to use that knife now?" Sarah gripped the gun. She wiped the tears from her face. She looked at Thomas, then at the door where the bullets were flying. "No," she said. "I'm going to use the gun." The cabin was dying. Vance's men weren't just shooting anymore. They were throwing torches. The heavy logs, seasoned by years of wind and dry air, caught fire with a roar that rivaled the storm. Smoke, thick and black, began to choke the room, curling along the ceiling like a living thing. Sarah coughed, pressing a rag to her face. She was huddled behind the overturned table, reloading Mercer's revolver with trembling fingers. Mercer was at the window slit, firing blindly into the whiteout. Crack. Crack. Then a click. Empty. He slid down the wall, his face smeared with soot and sweat. His bandaged arm was bleeding again, a fresh red stain blooming on the white linen. "We can't stay here," he rasped. "The roof will come down in minutes." Sarah looked at Thomas. Her brother was lying by the hearth, pale as death. But he was breathing. Shallow, bubbling breaths. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Did I?" Thomas whispered, a froth of blood on his lips. "Did I win?" "You're alive, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice breaking. She looked at Mercer. "We can't leave him," Mercer looked at the flames licking the rafters. Then he looked at the boy who had tried to kill him 5 minutes ago. "The barn," Mercer said. "There's a root cellar under the pantry. It tunnels to the barn. I dug it for snow drifts. We have to go now. He can't walk, John." Mercer holstered his empty pistol. He grabbed his knife, the only weapon he had left besides his fists. He crawled over to Thomas. "I've got him," Mercer grunted. He hauled Thomas up, draping the boy's limp body over his good shoulder. The strain turned Mercer's face gray with pain. His stitched arms screamed, but he stood up, crouching low under the smoke. "Go," he ordered Sarah. "Open the hatch in the pantry." "Go," Sarah scrambled on hands and knees. The heat was blistering now. She reached the pantry, threw aside a rug, and found the iron ring of the trapdoor. She heaved it open. Cold, damp earth smell rose up to meet the smoke. "Down," Mercer commanded. Sarah dropped into the darkness. Mercer followed, sliding Thomas down into her arms before dropping in himself. He reached up and slammed the hatch shut just as the cabin roof groaned and began to sag. They were in a narrow dirt tunnel, smelling of potatoes and mold. Above them, the fire roared like a freight train. "Move," Mercer wheezed. "Vance will see the fire. He'll think we're dead. Or he'll come to check the bodies." They dragged Thomas through the dark. It was a nightmare journey of 30 yards, knees scraping on stones, lungs burning. They emerged into the barn. It was freezing, vast, and shadowed. The smell of hay and horses was overwhelming. The black draft horses stomped nervously in their stalls, sensing the fire nearby. Mercer laid Thomas on a pile of straw. He collapsed beside him, gasping for air. "We're trapped," Sarah said, checking the barn doors. They were barred from the inside, but outside, Vance's men would be circling. "Not trapped," Mercer said. He pulled himself up. He limped to a stack of crates in the corner, crates Sarah had ignored before. He pried one open. Dynamite, mining sticks. Left over from the days when he thought he might mine the argent vein himself, before guilt took his ambition. "We have teeth," Mercer said grimly. He took a bundle of sticks. He looked at Sarah. "Do you know how to use these?" "My father was a miner," Sarah said. "I know how to fuse a cap, rig the doors," Mercer said. "If they come in, we blow the entrance. It will buy us a standoff." Sarah took the dynamite. Her hands were steady now. The fear had burned away in the cabin fire. All that was left was cold calculation. She worked quickly, placing the charges near the main doors, running the fuse line back to the stalls. Mercer was by the hayloft ladder, checking the perimeter through the cracks in the wood. "They're coming," he whispered. "Vance wants to see the bodies." Thomas opened his eyes. The pain was gone. That was bad. He knew that much. When the pain goes, the end is coming. He was lying on straw. Above him, the high rafters of the barn were lost in shadow. He turned his head. He saw Sarah rigging explosives. He saw John Mercer, the monster, the savior, standing guard with a pitchfork because he was out of bullets. Thomas remembered the gun. The weight of it. The lie Vance had told him. He's the danger. "I'm saving you." He had been so stupid. A lifetime of stupidity, capped with one final, fatal mistake. He had led the wolf to the door. "Sarah," he croaked. Sarah dropped the fuse and ran to him. She knelt, taking his cold hand. "I'm here, Thomas. I'm here. I messed up," Thomas whispered. A tear tracked through the soot on his face. "I just wanted to be the one who fixed it. Just once." "Shoo," Sarah smoothed his hair. "It's okay. We're safe." "No," Thomas said. His eyes shifted. He saw the crack in the barn door. He saw the shadows moving outside. "Come out, John." Vance's voice echoed from the yard. "The cabin is a pyre. Don't make me burn the barn too. I know you're in there." "I saw the tracks." Mercer stepped back from the door. He looked at Sarah. Fuses ready, yes, light them when I say, no. Vance shouted. Send the girl out. And the map. And maybe I let you die quick. Mercer looked at Thomas. Can you hold a gun? Son, Thomas nodded weakly. Mercer took the revolver from Sarah's belt, the one Thomas had tried to kill him with. He placed it in Thomas's hand. One bullet left, Mercer lied. There were two. Save it for the end. If they get past me, don't let them take her. Thomas gripped the gun. It felt miles heavy. John, Thomas whispered. Mercer leaned down. I'm sorry, Thomas said. Mercer rested his hand on the boy's shoulder. A gentle, forgiving weight. Rest now, Thomas. You did your best. Mercer stood up. He grabbed a heavy logging axe from the wall. He stood in the center of the barn, between the doors and Sarah. Open it. Vance ordered outside. The barn doors shook. Someone was ramming them. Light it, Mercer said. Sarah struck a match. She lit the fuse. It hissed, a serpentine sound in the quiet. The doors splintered open. 3 men burst in, silhouettes against the snow. Vance was behind them. Boom, the dynamite didn't bring the barn down. It blew the frame of the door inward. A cloud of splinters and dust erupted. The 2 lead men were thrown backward like ragdolls, broken by the blast, but the 3rd man stumbled through the smoke. And Vance followed him, stepping over the debris, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. Kill him. Vance screamed. The gunman raised his rifle. Mercer didn't have a gun. He charged. He moved with the desperate speed of a wounded bear. He took the bullet in his side, a grunt of impact, but he kept moving. He swung the axe. It buried itself in the gunman's chest. Mercer went down with the man. The axe stuck. Vance stood there. He held a fine, pearl-handled revolver. He aimed it at Mercer, who was trying to rise, bleeding from 2 new wounds. You are hard to kill, butcher, Vance said. He cocked the hammer. Sarah screamed. She lunged from the shadows, wielding the hunting knife. Vance spun, backhanding her with the pistol. The blow caught her temple. She fell, the world spinning into gray. Vance turned back to Mercer. Goodbye, John. Thomas watched. He was fading. The darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. He couldn't feel his legs, but he saw Vance. He saw the man who had lied to him. The man who had turned him into a weapon against his own blood. Thomas lifted his hand. The revolver shook. It weighed 1,000 pounds. Be a hero, Thomas. He didn't aim at Vance. He knew he would miss. His hands were shaking too much. He looked up. Above Vance, hanging from a rafter, was a kerosene lantern. Old, rusty, but full of oil. And directly below it, a crate of hay. And next to the hay, the open crate of dynamite sticks that Sarah hadn't used. Thomas smiled. It was a bloody, broken smile. Hey, Harlan, Thomas whispered. Vance didn't hear him. Thomas squeezed the trigger. Bang. The shot went wide of Vance. Vance laughed. Missed, boy, but the bullet hit the lantern. Glass shattered. Burning oil rained down. It hit the hay. It hit the crate. Vance looked up. What the explosion wasn't a sound. It was a force. It ripped the roof off the barn. It threw Vance across the room. It knocked Mercer flat. The shockwave stopped Thomas's heart before the fire could touch him. He died with his eyes open, watching the light. He had finally fixed it. The barn was a ruin. The roof was gone, open to the swirling snow. Fires burned in patches, illuminating the wreckage. Sarah coughed, pushing debris off her legs. Her head swam. She looked around. Mercer was lying near the stalls. He wasn't moving. Vance was standing. He was burned, his fine coat shredded, his face bleeding from a dozen cuts. But he was standing. He was like a cockroach that refused to be crushed. He stumbled toward Mercer. He kicked the axe away from Mercer's reach. Map, Vance wheezed. Where is the map? He kicked Mercer in the ribs. Mercer groaned, curling in on himself. I will burn this whole valley, Vance screamed, his sanity gone. I will dig up every inch. He aimed his gun at Mercer's head. Last chance, John. Sarah saw the knife. It had slid across the floor when she fell. It was 10 feet away. Vance's back was to her. She tried to stand. Her leg gave way. Twisted. She crawled. She crawled through the straw, through the blood, through the snow that was falling into the burning barn. Vance cocked the hammer. Sarah's fingers closed around the bone handle. She didn't scream. She didn't announce herself. She remembered the lesson. Steel does the job. She surged up on her good leg. She launched herself at Vance's back. She drove the knife into his kidney. Deep. To the hilt. Vance gasped, a wet, sucking sound. His gun fired into the dirt. He spun around, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at Sarah. He looked at the girl he had underestimated for 10 years, you. He gurgled. Sarah didn't let go. She twisted the blade. She looked him in the eye, for my father. She whispered. She pulled the knife out and stabbed him again. In the chest, for Thomas. Vance fell to his knees. He clutched at his chest, blood pouring through his fingers, staining the snow black. He looked at the sky, at the falling snow, cold, he whispered, and then he fell forward, dead before he hit the ground. Sarah stood over him. She was panting, her breath white clouds in the firelight. She held the bloody knife. She was shaking. Sarah, she turned. Mercer was propped up against a bale of hay. He was holding his side. He was looking at her. There was no fear in his eyes. Only a profound, quiet pride. Sarah dropped the knife. She walked over to him and collapsed into the straw beside him. She rested her head on his shoulder. He rested his chin on her head. Around them, the fires crackled and died under the snow. Thomas lay peaceful in the corner. Vance lay dead in the dirt. The winter storm raged on, but inside the ruins of the barn, there was finally silence. They buried Thomas and the others when the storm broke 2 days later. The ground was frozen iron. It took Mercer and Sarah 2 days to dig the graves. They buried Thomas next to the old pine tree on the ridge, overlooking the valley. They buried Vance and his men in a shallow pit downwind, unmarked. Mercer didn't die. He was too stubborn, or perhaps too punished, to die. Sarah tended his wounds. She stitched him up again. She fed him. They lived in the root cellar for a week until they could patch the cabin roof. It was a strange, quiet time. The danger was gone. The map was safe. But the space between them was filled with the ghosts of the things they had done. Spring came slowly that year. It arrived in April, a sudden thaw that turned the snow to slush and made the creek roar with meltwater. On the first day the pass was clear, Mercer packed his saddlebags. He groomed the gray mare. He checked the hooves. Sarah stood on the porch, watching him. She wasn't wearing the gray dress anymore. She was wearing a pair of trousers she had cut down from Thomas's old clothes, and one of Mercer's flannel shirts. She looked like part of the land now. Mercer led the horse to the porch. He held his hat in his hands. He looked old. The winter had taken something from him that wouldn't grow back. The safe is open, he said. There's enough gold to get you to San Francisco. Maybe further. I know, Sarah said. The deed to the land is on the table. It's in your name now. I saw. Mercer looked at his boots. I can't stay, Sarah. Why? Because every time you look at me, you see him, Mercer said, his voice cracking. You see the fire. You see your father. I see the man who saved me, Sarah said. I killed him, Sarah. I lit the match, and I killed Vance, Sarah said calmly. Does that make me a monster? Mercer looked up. No. You did what you had to, so did you. Vance owned you then. Just like he owned Thomas. It's not the same. It is. Sarah stepped off the porch. She walked up to him. She stood close enough to smell the leather and soap and pine. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a piece of paper. It was the page from the ledger. The page that said, Debt status, unpayable. She held it up. You think you owe a debt, she said. Mercer nodded. Sarah struck a match on the porch rail. She held it to the corner of the paper. Mercer flinched, reaching out as if to save it. But he stopped. They watched the flame eat the words. Unpayable curled into black ash and floated away on the spring breeze. The debt is paid, Sarah said. Thomas paid it. You paid it. We're clean. Mercer stared at the ash. His eyes were wet. I don't have anywhere to go, he whispered. This valley, it's the only place I know. Good, Sarah said. She reached out and took the reins from his hand. She tied the horse back to the rail. She turned to him. She didn't smile. It wasn't a happy ending. It was a real one. The barn roof needs fixing, she said. And I can't lift the beams alone. Mercer looked at the horse, then at the horizon, then at Sarah. He looked at her hands, scarred now, strong. He looked at her eyes, which held no fear. Only a deep, abiding winter calm. He took a breath. The first breath of spring air that didn't taste like guilt. He put his hat back on. It'll take a week to mill the lumber, he said gruffly. Then you better get started, Sarah said. She turned and walked back into the cabin, leaving the door open. Mercer stood there for a moment, listening to the creek, listening to the wind in the pines. It didn't sound like screaming anymore. It sounded like a song. He unhitched the horse and led it back to the barn.